Welcome to What Healthy Couples Know That You Don't, a podcast dedicated to helping you create the relationship you truly want.
In the interest of being authentic, I want to acknowledge that I made a huge error in the last episode. I was traveling for the entire month of May and had too many things on my plate, and I downloaded a 30-second audiogram instead of the full episode that you all deserved. Here it is in its entirety now. Thanks for your understanding and patience. How to Make Conflict Work for Real Intimacy, episode 107. Thanks for being here. People love to avoid conflict because it is messy. Conflict makes people uncomfortable and they don't like not knowing what's going to happen. Conflict is really important for growing up, in my mind. My definition of growing up is honestly facing painful situations. Conflict offers an opportunity to grow up, and it's certainly not easy to step into conflict in a respectful way. Conflict offers the opportunity to learn more about yourself. All the big moments of learning in my own personal life have emerged out of conflict or therapy. Conflict offers you the opportunity to learn more about the other person. Since that's a new way to think about conflict, I'm going to say that again. Conflict offers the opportunity to learn more about yourself and the other person. If you are going to face up to conflict more often, you have to change how you feel about it. Feelings are all wrapped up in avoiding conflict. We perceive conflict as scary, and too often our experience is that it is ugly. We all want to be nice and liked. Who needs to be uncomfortable? It's similar to the growing weariness about the war in the Ukraine. It is messy and painful to even look at the pictures. FDR had to sneak supplies to Europe in World War II because Americans wanted to avoid the cost of it until Pearl Harbor. The price of doing what is right is hard to pay. Yet doing what is right is exactly what matters. Facing conflict, being honest in interpersonal relationships is right and matters. Do Americans believe doing the right thing instead of insulating themselves with lies still matters? I hope so. Conflict is a source of growth that takes courage because both people will have to look at themselves as having a part in the problem. Blame is such a comforting activity, a one-way street that we all love. Conflict requires listening and taking a look at yourself. Not as easy to do. We all love the power plays to shut down conflict, loud shouting, the silent treatment, name calling and swearing, not being forthright, and stashing resentment silently until we are self-righteously entitled to cash them in. This last stashing of resentments is such an ordinary activity. It's amazing any relationships survive. It's important not to squelch disagreement by using a power move. Healthy relationships understand disagreements are a part of the package, and that's how we respect the differences. Trying to get rid of disagreement is often about a need for control. I used to do group therapy, and I loved how it would move people to embrace change. Group therapy is only effective when there is enough safety to wrestle with conflict. When people wanted individual attention and my group size shrunk, I gave it up because groups dwindled into being only about support. Groups need to offer support and challenge, just like an individual therapist. If you are in therapy and not being challenged to look at yourself, and it is merely support, there is something wrong. If you are afraid to conflict or even disagree with your therapist, something is wrong. Honesty is the path to trust, and conflict is an ordinary part of that process. If the work of love is about being a better person, then a willingness to conflict is an important way to go about that. Conflict provides that window into how you need to improve. Avoiding conflict interrupts your progress towards better mental health. So, my mission today is to convince my audience about the importance of facing up to conflict, and of course, that includes being choiceful about it. I'm not advocating constant conflict. I am encouraging the risk of conflict to be truly known by those you love. So, I've invited a guest to help us explore conflict and offer advice about doing it better. I want to welcome Tanya Lester. She is a licensed clinical social worker, private psychotherapist, Psychology Today contributor, and author. For over 16 years, Tonya, sorry, I've just caught myself. Tonya has taught couples and individuals how to manage their minds and emotions and develop relationships that are mutually respectful. She has a new book out, Be Difficult, a guide to speaking up, facing conflict, and changing your life. And when's it going to be out, Tonya?
Not until early next year. So we're a little bit ahead, but it's coming.
Okay.
It's coming.
Okay. Let's begin with adding your thoughts to my intro about avoiding conflict and why is it so pervasive?
You know, we are taught that getting along easily and having total harmony is the goal in all relationships. And of course, we know maybe intellectually that you cannot be known by your partner or by anyone else if you're keeping quiet in the ways that you disagree, or you're feeling hurt, or or you're going in a direction perhaps as a couple that isn't where you want to go. But we really equate harmony with love and harmony with connection, where in fact, the only path to emotional intimacy is through conflict. And of course, as you referenced, we're not talking about drag out, fights where there's name calling and you both walk away feeling shattered. We're talking about clearly narrating what's going on with you, sharing what you're imagining about the situation, and inviting your partner to do the same. And I loved how you made it more global, talking about how we do not want to see the mess, right? It's how we're programmed, and being able to see the mess in a global way and then in our interpersonal relationships is 100% the only way to take meaningful action.
Oh, I totally agree, of course. I'm thinking that one of the after effects of the pandemic was that so many couples may have either increased their conflict avoidance to get along in a shared small space, or increasing their conflict with each other and ended up parting ways. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've seen the same thing. And so with the set of people who maybe were increasing their conflict avoidance, I think most of us who went through the pandemic with other people would agree that some of that was just adaptive, right? It's extending some grace to ourselves and those around us and trying to just kind of get through. Hopefully now that there's some breathing room, if people are having a lot of trouble going back to healthy conflict, that would be a great time to read a book, for example, together, or to bring in some professional help, or just to set aside. I'm constantly suggesting to people to do like a Sunday meeting, maybe for an hour, where we say, we're going to talk about hard things. We know that we've fallen out of the practice of bringing up difficult things in the moment. And so we're going to set aside this time, get our cups of coffee, brace ourselves and say what needs to be said, and maybe finances or child rearing or whatever. We're going to have a container in the same way, of course, we do with couples and couples therapy. We're going to contain these hard conversations. That's what I suggest for conflict avoidant couples who are trying to make a change on their own. For people whose conflict went way up, what I found, and I'm curious if you found this as well in your practice, a lot of times people were fighting and bickering over the small things in order to avoid deep underlying issues that probably existed pre-pandemic. But pre-pandemic, everyone was allowed to stay busy, stay distracted, avoid, pretend that the deeper issues weren't happening. And then suddenly there you are, basically sharing 3 meals a day, not being able to rely on our other supports. And what I found is that some couples actually became much stronger. It was like, okay, well, it's just us. Here we are. Now we have to deal with it. But then, of course, as you're saying, some couples really fell apart. And what I find quite sad, actually, is that some couples, the bickering was a way to avoid the hard conversations that perhaps would have led to a different outcome had both parties been committed to staying together and working it out. But yeah, it put pressure on the system, right? As I say, therapy puts pressure on the system in a good way. The pandemic put pressure on the system, often in a very destructive, terrible way.
Yeah, I agree. I really do. I met a young couple once at a gathering, and they asked me what I do, which I usually try to avoid. But I told them, and they said, "Oh, we're getting married. What's your advice?" And I said, "Talk about hard things. That is my number one advice, and practice now." you know.
That's right. Practice now. That's funny. My cousin is getting married, and he, they sent around any advice. I think they're compiling a book, and I said the Sunday meeting thing I just said, that was my suggestion, and I laid out, talk about sex, talk about finances, any hard thing, every single week, make it a practice.
I just had a session and somebody talked to me about not having sex. And I said, well, you're not having sex. You have the most power. The person who has sex the least has the most power. You're the roadblock. So you really need to think about that and talk about it, because that's disturbing to your partner. So yeah, I love that you included sex, because a lot of people don't talk about sex. I actually did a workshop once, and this guy, he was older, but he raised his hand and he kind of proudly said to me, "I don't talk about sex with my clients." And I was like, well, you're doing them a massive disservice, and I have no idea why you're thinking that's a good idea. I just shut him right down, because I thought, do not influence this group of people to think that's normal, So yeah, yeah. And 39% of Americans are not having sex, which I find disheartening, So, but it is what it is. Hopefully we can keep changing it. So I mentioned in the intro that people love to use power plays and conflict in order to be the top dog, in order to win. What would you like to add to the list of ways to manipulate, which prevents more honest communication?
One that I've been seeing a lot in my practice is blame shifting. And so taking a partner comes forward with a complaint, and the other partner shifts, right? Maybe to some offense that they've had. And so they aren't going to talk about what your problem is until their problem has been discussed, right? As a way to sort of derail the initial conversation. Or they will be attacking the way the first partner brought up the issue. And of course, there are good ways and bad ways to bring up a hard issue. But if every time you try and talk to your partner and they say, well, if you hadn't used that tone of voice, or why did you ask me right as I'm walking out the door, you might be dealing with someone who's blame shifting. And the last way, and I think this is very corrosive, is you bring up a problem, and just bringing up the problem is so hurtful to the other partner that the partner who was upset ends up comforting the other partner. And, so it's like we can take a grandiose position of anger in order to derail, or we can take, a collapsed position, but the results are the same. It's a way of not kind of standing up, being the adult in the conversation, and being able to kind of stick with your partner through these hard conversations.
taking the easy way out instead of dealing with something that really can change your future and make things better. I love you adding those two. That's really good. Thanks so much. Now we've heard about what interrupts more honest communication. What tools can my audience use to have more respectful conflict dialogue?
Okay. So I often suggest that people start, and of course I'm long married and I do this myself, is just narrating what you're seeing going on with as little reactivity as possible. And so it might be something like, I notice that I'm always the last one home, and yet I am in charge of making dinner and no one else has even started anything. And so I rush in at the last minute, everyone else is relaxing and I'm frantic. That's what I notice is happening. And then you say what it does for you. And so I might say, I find when I walk in the door, I get enraged. Like I feel my blood pressure fly to the top of my head because I think, and I have all these stories about you guys not caring about me or how exhausted I am. Even though intellectually I know that, well, you do clean up, and I have taken on this job. So what's amazing is if you can kind of play both sides of it and just say, like, I understand that there's two sides. So we're saying, narrate what you feel, narrate what's going on for you and your thoughts about it, and then ask for what you need. And don't worry if what you don't know precisely what you need. I think this trips people up, is that they're upset and they're like, well, I don't even know what to ask for anyways. What's he going to do about it? He doesn't know how to cook, or what's she going to do about it? I do all the grocery shopping, so she doesn't even know what we have. So I think you can be simpler and say something like, can we sit down and reorient who does what? Because I don't want to walk in the door and be angry at you the first thing I walk in. So narrate what's happening for you, narrate what you see happening, narrate what you're telling yourself about it, and then request a collaborative solution.
Yes, I like that. That's really very clear. I know you write about putting pressure on the system in your book. Would you share how to ensure our relationships can survive the healthy pressure required to evolve and grow?
So, putting pressure on the system is essentially about leaning into healthy conflict. So it's essentially saying, can I share who I really am? Can I share disagreements and preferences with my partner without that being seen as an attack or kind of dismantling the whole relationship? The best way to make sure that your relationship is, pressure on the system proof is to start it early, like we were saying before. If you get married and or just get together, and at the very beginning of the relationship, you say something like, hey, it's really important to me that we are able to talk about hard things. How should we set that up in our relationship? I don't want to do it in a way where I'm blurting things out, and I don't want it to just feel attacking and hurtful. So what is that going to look like for us? And then you can collaborate with your partner on how is this going to be normal. By far, the worst thing to do is say nothing, get used to harmony, fall in love with this idea that you are a couple that never fights. The worst thing a couple can say to me when they walk in is, all our friends are jealous of the relationship we have. Either I know that's for sure not true, or it's because it's fake, right? Or it's because you're acting like there's no conflict, and that's not what's real. So let's stop pretending that a totally harmonious relationships are real. So if you find yourself in that position, you need a reset. And of course, therapy can help a lot, but even to sit down and say, I want to know you and I want you to know me. And I think we're avoiding hard conversations, and I want to talk about how we might start to have useful conversations. And as I'm sure you say all the time with your clients, this is why, people say use I statements. It's because it's better to start with, I feel like this, and this is what I'm thinking, as opposed to, you do this, you are this. Yeah. So, but I think that we can always course correct. I think that when a couple collapses under the pressure, it's because there's no infrastructure for going through hard times. And we're all going to go through hard times.
Absolutely. Yeah, suffering is a part of life.
Right.
So being able to talk about it and recognize it is incredibly important. Certainly, women are taught to be caretakers, and in accommodating others, they pay a great cost to themselves. For all those women and those men who are lopsided in accommodating others at their own expense, would you define the 5 costs?
The 5 costs of being like people pleasers and over accommodating.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Well, lack of being known. I think about this all the time. If we are people pleasers, we are keeping others from knowing who we really are, which is the bedrock of emotional intimacy. So I'd say that that is one. 2 would be that we don't get to openly share our vulnerability and where we need support and get help ourselves, or it becomes a mentality of I need to do everything by myself, which is very isolating and how people find themselves quite lonely in relationships. 3, especially in parenting, you're not teaching other people to develop the skills they need to manage themselves. I think constantly, what am I modeling for both my son and my daughter in terms of how they're going to be healthy adults in healthy relationships? 4, this is something I say all the time, people pleasers are the biggest liars. You cannot people please or be a perfectionist without really lying all the time, because you have to tell people things that they're not going to be happy about. And so this can be the root of financial infidelity, which I don't know about you. I'm seeing this constantly right now in my practice.
Absolutely.
And, lying about finances is a huge betrayal. It shakes the bedrock of relationships in very similar to sexual infidelity. So if you're people pleasing and you're protecting other people's feelings around disappointment or around conflict, if you just have an agreement, say, about money, you're going to find yourself fibbing and lying, and that will make you just enormously anxious. And then the 5th one I would say is there's so much that needs to be changed in the world as far as gender equality. It is not happening fast enough. The problems that my mother had in her relationships are too similar to the problems I have in my relationships. And I hope that for my daughter, it will be different. And there's only so much we can do about the world, right? We can march. We certainly can vote. We can donate to important causes. But what would happen if we all overthrew these issues of over-accommodating in our own relationships, right? What if there was a seismic change in terms of how we were all reacting individually and there was no more over-accommodating? The world would change. The world would change. I don't think that's an overstatement.
No, I don't either. I've been working with somebody, and she said, I think my husband really is very surprised at how much I've been speaking up. And I reminded her, I said, well, he didn't marry you that way. And you've really changed and you've worked hard. But you're happier because you have a more honest relationship, but he's still getting used to it. And I think there's just something about that authenticity that is so important in a relationship, or you really don't have squat.
That's right, 100%, right? Because now he knows her, right? Before it was just pretend.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay. I believe that being difficult means learning that anger is a legitimate tool in the emotional toolbox, that exploring the smaller bits of anger, such as irritations or annoyances, is a way to delve into knowing your wants and learning to speak up more. What advice do you have about anger as a way to learn more about yourself? Because I think so many people are resistant to that.
Yeah, I agree, especially women. I think that, I tell people often that anger is fuel and that nothing changes at all without anger, right? We can say that individually or collectively. And so if you're feeling angry, it's because a value has been activated in you, a boundary that you might not have even known you had has been crossed. There is something that needs to happen. Action needs to be taken. And I think where anger gets a bad rap is if there's instant reactivity as though a match has been thrown on gasoline and the whole house burns down, which is, of course, what people are afraid of. And people are afraid of their own anger, and that's why. Whereas anger, if totally accepted, and you use it as a way to get curious about yourself. I have something I refer to as the weather vane emotions, right? And anger is one of them. And it's everything from resentment to irritation, to, of course, like righteous anger, which is maybe where we move into a more grandiose position. That was totally wrong. If we can take a step back and observe what has happened here, really give ourselves compassion for being so activated, and then, give ourselves some space to think about how to best respond. I think as long as there's some space between the activation and the response, then anger is a wonderful tool and very important. And to not have anger, it's like walking around without skin. You're not protected. We're supposed to feel angry, because otherwise we wouldn't defend ourselves.
I like how you labeled it a weather vane emotion. I think that's really cool. I have not heard that. One of the fun things about doing the podcast is getting different language and different ways of talking about it, because I find we do repeat ourselves, but different combinations of words connect for different people.
That's right.
And so it's one of the fun things I benefit from the podcast. In general, there is a culture of being cowardly about addressing hard things, or entitled exploding. How can people pleasers find more courage to speak up and risk conflict?
So I think if you are a people pleaser and you are afraid of conflict, I think it's very useful to write down what you're going to say ahead of time, because not all of us can think on our feet. And I'm sure you've had couples come in where they say, when she's mad at me, she can talk in perfect paragraphs and I get overwhelmed and I don't know what to say. Or as soon as he starts saying what's mad and asking me why, my mind just goes blank. If you can sit down and really, and use, you can use the frame I laid out before about, this is what I see, this is what it means to me, and this is what I would like to see change. You could write that down. That might be very useful. You could read it to the person who needs to hear it. I also think it's very, very useful to begin with a frame. I tell people this all the time. Sometimes I think we finally get the courage to say something and we blurt it out or say it at a completely inopportune time. And then the other person is back on their heels and it probably will be more reactive if that's how we're approaching them. Instead, I think you can even make an appointment. You can say, I want to take some time to talk about something, or sit down in a calm moment and give them a frame, which might be, we need to talk, right? That's the old famous one people have been using since the beginning of time. Or you can say, like, I have something to share. I want to say something that might be hard to hear. Get your partner ready.
Yes. Okay. Can you talk about the myth of the low maintenance woman and how to take back your power from this dangerous ideal?
Yes. So the low maintenance woman, this is one of my favorite concepts, because I think that it was one of these, when I was like in high school during the 90s, it would be considered a very good thing to be considered low maintenance by, the guys, to be like, I'm no trouble. Or in the book Gone Girl, she calls it being a cool girl. Like, I ask for nothing, I'm up for anything. It's a lie, and it's really encouraging others to take us for granted. It's encouraging others not to try and meet our needs. And so the idea that low maintenance is good is very devaluing and frankly objectifying. In the book I write, lawns can be low maintenance, cars can be low maintenance. No person should be low maintenance. So that's a terrible term to use. And so how we take our power back is speaking up in precisely the way that we're talking about here, and not being afraid. I would be thrilled to hear my husband be like, yeah, she's not always super easy, she's worth it. I think That would be the highest compliment. And we only get there by speaking up, saying what we want, being clear on what our values are, and vocal about them early on in these relationships, and not pretending to be easy breezy all the time, because again, because it's a lie, right? If it was true, that would be fine, but really humans are more complex than that. All of us are more complex than that.
Yes, I completely agree. Can any more important points that we haven't covered that you would like to share? My last question.
I say to people often, I do this work because of my foundational belief that the quality of our relationships is the quality of our life, which we hear, a lot of people. I know Esther Perel says that a lot. Well, who are we outside of our relationships? And of course, it doesn't have to be a romantic relationship. It can be with our friends. It can be with our pets, right? Like, what kind of doting, dog, mom, or dad are you? This is why we're on earth, and this is why I feel very called to do this work, and why I feel like it's so important. And any quality relationship will involve some conflict, because you won't really know the other person if there's no conflict, and they won't really know you. And we all live for emotional intimacy, and on our, it's such a cliche, but on our deathbed, you will not care about putting in 6 extra hours at work. All you'll care about is who is, around the living room with you. And knowing how to have healthy conflict is the way that you invest in those relationships.
Absolutely, 100%, totally agree. Tonya, could you share the title of your book again, and where people can find out more about you?
So my book is called Be Difficult. There's a little back and forth with the about the subtitle, so I'm just going to say Be Difficult. And I'm on Instagram. I just shot something today on the blame shifting, and so I'm trying to share as much as I can on there. So it's Tonya Lester Psychotherapy is that handle. And then I also have a blog on Psychology Today. So Psychology Today blog, Tonya Lester. Oh, and lastly, I have a website, tonyalester.com, and I have a quiz I just put up there about are you the right kind of difficult? And it's right in lines about what we're talking about. If you're difficult, if you're impossible, which is too much, or if you're low maintenance. So it hits on a lot of these ideas.
I like the continuum of that very much. So glad you're listening today. Spread the word and leave a review. It would be greatly appreciated. There are over 450 pages of free information at therapyideas.net, and I'm on Instagram at RhodaOnCouples.
Thank you for listening to What Healthy Couples Know That You Don't. If you have enjoyed the show, please leave a rating and review on iTunes and help get the word out. To learn more or connect with Rhoda, visit therapyideas.net.